Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. It's 11:33 p.m. on December 28th of 2024. And tonight the podcast is titled Renewal, which is, I think, more on a personal level than a public level. Public renewal is something that we're not really in control of, and it's very difficult to do. And it makes you a worldly person rather than a spiritual person. So we have a decision to make, each of us, in our lives, and that decision is whether we are going to pursue the realization of self, which is the spiritual goal of all seekers, religious people as well, whether they realize it or not, and they might be loath to admit that. But we, at our deepest level of being, connect to everything. And this is what a self-realized person is, somebody who realizes that connection to everything, that we are actually a drop of the ocean, and the ocean is the creative principle, the divine, God. Now, I did something today that very odd thing I did today. Well, not really, but maybe something I should have done a long time ago. I got a hold of one of Yuval Harari's books. This is, if you don't know who Yuval Harari is, let me bring him up here. He's pretty hard to miss these days. Yuval Noah Harari. And I will show you who he is. Okay, there he is. So you all know who he is. Born in Israel, the right hand of Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, PhD in history from Oxford University in Great Britain. And when I decided I was going to give this guy a chance, because I thought, well, here are his books. Here's the one I picked up, Sapiens, and which was published in 2011. Now, allegedly, he has sold 45 million copies of his books. I literally could not believe it when I heard it. It is really kind of amazing. Hang on a sec. I have to figure out what my application is for. I'll read excerpts of the book. I got the Kindle version. But I think now... here we go. Yeah. So we'll take a look at this. So I'm going to start doing a lot more structure in my podcast. I'm going to start going over research papers in various books the way I used to do McDonald in the morning. I mean, don't get me wrong, and don't lose faith in me. You're still going to get the great storytelling, and I'm still going to do the fireside style podcast where I just sit and pontificate for 50 minutes because I love to do it. But I find doing it 7 days a week, some days I'm struggling. Not struggling, but I don't know what I'm going to say. I just go live and I guess it all comes together, which is kind of a miracle, but that's the way it works. But now what I want to do is I want to start going more into other material, and I want to start deconstructing and taking apart some of the great public-facing voices in the world today. And look, I don't want you to think that I enjoy this, although I do. I do. There's nothing I enjoy more than deconstructing an undeserving public voice who's had tremendous influence on the public mind. And this guy has definitely been on my radar for a while, and I held back. And the reason I held back was I hadn't taken the time to read any of his material other than some articles and 3 or 4 YouTube interviews he's done. He's gay. He's a hedonist in a sense that he denies himself no pleasure and he takes no guilt in pleasure, which is a very Jewish thing, by the way. Okay? Now, one thing that interested me in his biography is that he's a meditator. And he's a serious meditator. He meditates 2 hours a day in the Vipassana style. And he does a 60-day silent retreat once a year, which is very difficult. Most of us would go crazy trying to do a 60-day retreat. I wouldn't. I've gone 60 days in my life without talking to people and living alone and not having any external stimulation. It's actually my preferred way to live, which nephews left today, grandkids come tomorrow. 4 grandkids, I think, aging from 6 to 10. Yay. I like it, though. I mean, I'm not going to say I don't like it. It gives me utility. It gives me purpose. I'm a rock star with my wife. You know. Pig came in for the church today. Went down to town and picked it up. I paid about $300 Canadian for a whole pig. And it's for a New Year celebration with my wife's evangelical congregation. What are you going to do, right? What are you going to do? So what I'm going to start with is just reading the table of contents, and this will give you a very good sense of how he thinks. And I'll show you what I'm doing, because I can do it now. I've got it all set up, and I can continue to talk. By the way, I do not like, this is called Aquil, and it's an ebook reader on Windows 11, and I don't like it at all. It doesn't allow me to choose the font. Books on Mac is just vastly superior. Okay? So part 1 is the cognitive revolution. And chapter 1 is An Animal of No Significance, the Tree of Knowledge, and Day in the Life of Adam and Eve, the Flood. Part 2 is the Agricultural Revolution, History's Biggest Fraud, Building Pyramids, Memory Overload, There is No Justice in History. Part 3 is the Unification of Humankind, The Arrow of History, The Scent of Money, Imperial Visions, The Law of Religion, The Secret of Success. Part 4 is The Scientific Revolution, The Discovery of Ignorance, The Marriage of Science and Empire, The Capitalist Creed, The Wheels of Industry, A Permanent Revolution, and They Lived Happily Ever After, The End of Homo Sapiens. And let me just show you the cover here, because it's kind of worth seeing. Very simple cover. A Brief History of Humankind. He's got a fingerprint there. Kind of clever, right? Let me just read a little bit of this to you. Part 1, The Cognitive Revolution. There's an interesting picture there. And that is a human handprint made about 30,000 years ago on the wall of the Chauvet Pont d'Arc cave in southern France. That's correct French spelling, by the way. You know about me being raised with those filthy animals in the East End of Ottawa. And Harari said, somebody tried to say I was here. There's a Wim Wenders documentary. And if you don't know who Wim Wenders is, he's a really kind of interesting German auteur, documentary and feature filmmaker. And he did a documentary called about 4 or 5 years ago, or maybe 8 or 9 years ago, about this cave and the art in the cave from 30,000 years ago. And they just found it a little while ago, like 20 or 30 years ago. And it was an archaeological and anthropological gold mine. And the documentary that Wim Wenders did is called Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Very well worth seeing. So I'm just going to read a little bit, but I'm going to use it to comment, okay? So about 13.5 billion years ago, matter, energy, time, and space came into being in what is known as the Big Bang. The story of these fundamental features of our universe is called physics. About 300,000 years after their appearance, matter and energy started to coalesce into complex structures called atoms, which then combined into molecules. The story of atoms, molecules, and their interactions is called chemistry. About 3.8 billion years ago, on a planet called Earth, certain molecules combined to form particularly large and intricate structures called organisms. The story of organisms is called biology. About 70,000 years ago, organisms belonging to the species Homo sapiens started to form even more elaborate structures called cultures. The subsequent development of these human cultures is called history. 3 important revolutions shaped the course of history. The cognitive revolution kick-started history about 70,000 years ago. The agricultural revolution sped it up about 12,000 years ago. The scientific revolution, which got underway only 500 years ago, may well end history and start something completely different. This book tells the story of how these 3 revolutions have affected humans and their fellow organisms. Okay, right out of the gate, I don't agree with anything he's saying. Okay? And he very incidentally, but deliberately, builds his thesis on a non-established public narrative hanging around in science. Now, before I decided to do a show about him, I watched a couple of his latest interviews. He did a very interesting interview with the young Indian gentleman in, I think he's in southern India, Bangalore, who runs the YouTube channel called Beer Biceps. And he's done some fascinating work and interviewed some fascinating people. And it was in that interview that I decided that Yuval Noah Harari is an idiot. Now, I have to define for you what an idiot is for me. Okay? Now, before I do that, I'm going to give you the textbook definition of idiot. Because I like to. Idiot definition. I like to be thorough. I mean, what can I say? Well, this is something, and this is from the Oxford Languages, which is a really good dictionary, by the way. Idiot, noun, a stupid person. I feel like an idiot who swallowed every lie I was told. And the archaic definition is a person of low intelligence. Now, this is why I have to give you standard definition and then give you my definition. My reality, as those of you who have been listening to me for the full year I've been podcasting now, is very different than the reality that is the publicly accepted reality. The reality that we agree upon in the public square. Now, I'm not so arrogant as to think that we don't need that. We do need a common meeting point where we can share a collective reality. And this is what science and the social sciences have done, mainly in the 20th century. Everything has been revolutionized in the 20th century. There's a fantastic 7,000-word chapter toward the end of Stardust Ranch called Crossroads, in which I simply point out that the 20th century brought us the dislocated voice, first emerging as radio, then the telephone, and then all the way to me podcasting and giving you a 2D, two-dimensional representation of myself in black and white, and my voice. So you get a conception of me, but you can't really feel me. The more sensitive of you can, no doubt about that. And you can't smell me, and you can't feel the environment I'm in. Nonetheless, you're spending time with me. And this is one of dozens of iterations on the single conceptual breakthrough, which is dislocated voice, which is the ability to project the voice vast distances. Now, prior to this, you could not converse with someone unless you were in physical proximity to each other, so you could speak and be heard. Now, I can sit down on a Saturday night near the end of 2024 and have a dozen of you listen to me live and another 400 or 500 listen to me on Rumble, Spotify, Substack, and YouTube in your own time. And I find that amazing. And the other two things that I highlighted as the trinity of advancement in the 20th century were rapid transportation, meaning you could move faster than a horse, and you could do so personally. Okay? And this was the combustion engine, and this was Henry Ford and the assembly line, the manufacturing assembly line, which was really the beginning of significant mass production. Now, factories had existed in the United Kingdom going back to the late 1700s. Certain kinds of factories existed where people would go work for a wage and go home at the end of the day. But the assembly line and the manufacturing process for complex products like an automobile, we really owe to Henry Ford. And you know what? Even having written the book, I can't remember what the third thing is. It's dislocated voice, rapid transportation. Oh, illumination at night. So there was a semi-illumination at night in European cities, and this was the old whale fat or whale oil industry. That's why they killed a lot of the whales, was to get the oil for the gas lamps that would keep the London cities lit up at night. Okay? And this we owe to Thomas Edison, who, along with J.P. Morgan, stabbed Nikola Tesla in the back and forced us into the metered system of electrical distribution to make wealthy people obscenely wealthy. And nobody needs or wants to be obscenely wealthy. It's about power. Okay? Power now is held in the hands of trillionaires, not billionaires anymore. Billionaires are princes. The kings are trillionaires now. May not all be their money, but they control it. So Larry Fink at BlackRock and Vanguard controls, I think, just a little bit under or right around $3 trillion. It's almost an unimaginable amount of money, you know, and I don't know what I would do being in charge of that much money. Now, the Industrial Revolution that produced the world we live in, and it's interesting to me the way Yuval Noah Harari structures his argument. And breaks it down into 3 revolutions. And of course, he's wrong. You know, he gets history wrong. I would say a truer telling of the last 55 million years on this planet is the Galactic Historian. And as always, if you want a copy of that book, just let me know. I can send it to you. I've done an EPUB now. I can send it to you in EPUB format or PDF format, and you can give it a read. And it's well worth your time. Well worth your time. The gentleman we owe the information to is not really worth your time. But nonetheless, he managed to deliver this information to the human race in a competent way when I collaborated on the book. And it is what really has happened on this planet for the spiritually aware. Now, when I say spiritually aware, I simply mean people who have broken the barrier of sense-mind. You don't have to have finished your journey. I haven't finished my journey, but I have definitively broken the barrier of sense-mind, which means my daily reality is a mystical one. It means that I don't think the way Yuval Noah Harari thinks. And one of the things that struck me particularly strange about this guy is how he could be so flat and by the way, this is my definition of an idiot. A person whose thinking has not broken the sense-mind barrier. Okay? And by the way, this is the future we're going into. The world is going to be run by people who have broken the sense-mind barrier. These pseudo-intellectuals and idiots, and that's my definition of idiot. It's someone for whom the context of their thinking has not broken the sense-mind barrier. These are the new Luddites. Because the next revolution is not technological, it's spiritual. This is the coming revolution. You can see it all around you. This is why you listen, in all probability, to the Talamanca Review. Because you've also had these experiences that can't be fit into the reality we discuss in the public square. The reality of somebody like Yuval Noah Harari. I want to also add that these people lie a lot. Okay? If this guy had genuinely sold 45 million copies of his books, each and every one of us in the last 10 years would have bumped into somebody who had read him. And they would say, "Have you read Yuval Noah Harari?" I read Sapiens, his 2011 book. Have you read Yuval Noah Harari? We know definitively that Haruki Murakami has sold millions of books, because you can bump into people who will say, "Have you read Norwegian Wood? Have you read the Wind-Up Bird Chronicles?" We know that Cormac McCarthy has sold millions of books, because you can bump into people who have read The Road by Cormac McCarthy. What do I do on my show? What is one of the mainstays in terms of sideline commentary on the Talamanca Review? It is cinema, television, and book recommendations. And I have recommended Cormac McCarthy to you. I'm now recommending Haruki Murakami to you, the Japanese writer. Margaret Atwood has probably sold 3 or 4 million copies of her books, most notably The Handmaid's Tale, which is being all over the place in the last 7 or 8 years with the Hulu series and everything. As a Canadian, you bump into people all the time who've read Margaret Atwood. All the time. I have never bumped into a person who told me they read Yuval Noah Harari. Never. And yet they claim he has sold 45 million copies of his book. Let's bump it up to 50 million, which is 1/20th of a billion. So that would mean that if his book sales were mainly in Europe and North America and Australia and the places that buy books, there's no book culture in Costa Rica. Nobody buys books here. Nobody says, "Hey, I'm going to the bookstore." I have yet to meet anybody who even owns a Kindle here, or who owns an iPad and uses the book application to read digital books. Never happens. It's not a reading culture. When I lived in Canada, Canada is a reading culture. You go to the coffee shop, every other person who's there alone has a book open, or a tablet, and they're reading a book. I met friends just walking into my coffee shop. It was like a meeting place in my community. It was about a 10-minute walk from my house, and I used to go there every day from about 2007 until I left in 2014 and came to Costa Rica. So for about 7 years, I would go to this coffee shop all the time. And I would walk into the coffee shop and I would see people reading books. And very many times I would have read the book myself because I'm an avid reader. I remember walking into the coffee shop one time and seeing a young woman in her 20s reading Sung Tsai's, the esoteric Buddhist master's book, Bones of the Master, which I told you about on this very podcast some months ago. And I walked right up to her, because this is what you can do with people who read. I walked right up to her and I said, "How far are you?" And she said, "Excuse me?" I said, "Bones of the Master." She said, "Oh, this is my second reading." I said, "Wow. I read that book too. I read it as well 2 years ago. It blew me away." And we sat and we talked about it for 5 or 10 minutes. I did not come off creepy as some older man hitting on her in his 40s. And this is what book culture is. I've walked into the coffee shop and seen people reading Hemingway. I go, "Wow, I didn't know people still read Hemingway. That's one of my favorites. When did you decide you were going to read A Movable Feast?" "Oh, it's mandatory for my literature class at university." "Oh, okay. How are you enjoying it?" "Oh, he writes beautifully." Okay, this is book culture. Okay? Now, if somebody sells 2 or 3 million copies of a book, you're going to bump into a reader if you're a book person. I am telling you right now, let me work this in properly and not do this half-assed, because it's not just about Yuval Noah Harari. Books are one of the things that they use the most in the foisted agenda, the agenda that they're foisting upon us. They have become propaganda tools. Okay? That's what they are now. They're just propaganda tools. And when they also use book publishing for money laundering now, and to get illicit funds to people so they can rationalize at least part of their wealth. "Hey, Obama, where'd you get the $45 million? "Well, don't you know, Bruce, I wrote a few books." I have yet to bump into anybody who has read Dreams of My Father. Nobody read the book. Believe me when I tell you, this is one of my areas of expertise. Books. Okay? Hillary Clinton's books, they say they sell millions of copies. Bestsellers on the New York Times. You know what a bestseller is on the New York Times? It's more than 5,000 copies. I've sold more than 5,000 copies of Stardust Ranch. Okay? It's a New York Times bestseller. By the way, at Christmas, when those videos I showed you of all the kids and the natives over at the church, I put them at the beginning of my podcasts a few weeks ago when we had the kids' Christmas party. We had some guests stay with us, and they were friends of my niece. And let me just find this for you. There was a young Costa Rican guy, came with his wife and his baby, and he was part of the team that was helping out. And let me just find, oh, here it is. His name is Jesus Jimenez, although in Spanish you say Jesus, you don't say Jesus. The J is an H. So he found out I was a writer. Bob told him. Bob was here. And this was, they were here the day before Larry came as well and brought me my MacBook. My Mac Mini with the M4 chip. And Bob said that, Bruce is a writer. And this young Costa Rican fellow, who I think his main job is he's an entrepreneur, but he's always been interested in writing. um, he asked me for a book. And he spoke reasonable English. And so I gave him a PDF copy of Stardust Ranch. And 2 days ago, this email came in on the 26th. Hey, Bruce. I just wanted to thank you for giving me your book, Stardust Ranch, to read. Honestly, it blew my mind. The events you shared were so incredible, and the whole story kept me hooked. It also helped me practice my English, which was a bonus. Anyways, but that's very interesting to have the book, you know. And so what he'll do now is he'll tell my niece, my niece Katia, who's like 39, she lives in the city, and my niece will tell my wife. And my wife will come and say, people are saying you're a really good writer. The book came out 5 years ago, you know, and but it's nothing is real to her until it gives her some esteem in her community. So the fact that I wrote a book that was read by a Costa Rican guy who loved it and is going to talk about it and say it to members of my family, who will say it back to my wife, it's a little incidental bonus. Wives are funny creatures. Anybody who's married knows this, right? I mean, you can do these extraordinary things, like write these really incredible books like Stardust Ranch, which is like kind of like a one-off miracle as a book. I don't know how I wrote that, but and like nobody here knows anything about it. And now for it to get back to my wife 5 years later, it's like, oh my God, like you're this is serious. You're a writer. 'Cause some guy told my niece. It's weird, but if I say to my wife, "Yeah, I'm a writer. I write books. People like my books." She goes, "Oh, that's cute." Right? It's just the way wives are. So there's no way that Yuval Noah Harari has sold 45 million books. They put that out into the public space. They put that lie out into the public space so everybody thinks this is an important person. And I don't know why, but it always seems to be Jews they do this with. By the way, they did it big time with Einstein. Einstein was not that bright, by the way. He was a plagiarist. He had low moral character, very deceptive guy, philanderer, and probably a pedophile. Okay? And look, I'm not taking any pleasure in denigrating the guy. Christopher John Bjerkens does a great 90-minute podcast on the Einstein deception. And it's one of the things he talks about that have gotten him onto other podcasts. And it's a very detailed and irrefutable damnation of the Einstein myth. And I don't know why it's always Jews. I don't know why they do this, but Yuval Noah Harari is the great Jewish intellectual of the early 21st century, and he's an idiot. Okay? And what mystifies me the most is the guy's been meditating for 20 years, and apparently he has not broken the sense-mind barrier. Okay? It's evident in his writing. He has not broken the sense-mind barrier. He has not gone into low-level multidimensional experience. He's not a mystic. And yet he meditates 2 hours a day. But I guess for him, it's psychological. It's some Nietzschean thing about razor-sharp perception. And it has nothing to do with awakened imagination or any of the fruits of this practice. But I would point out that Vipassana meditation is derivative of Buddhism. And the Buddha, he went several dimensions above. Like he went up past the astral into the causal, documented everything that was there. Okay? So if he could do it, then should be the definition of Buddhism, right? But not for Yuval Noah Harari. All right, so that's an animal of no significance. And then he does this whole like thing, right? Like our siblings according to speculative reconstructions, he's talking about evolution, but there's no clear evolutionary footprint here. Okay? The theory of evolution is the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard. And what they've done is they've taken one of the mystical principles of the creative process, which is that consciousness defines reality. Matter doesn't change consciousness. Consciousness changes matter, which is a spiritual principle. And Darwin flipped that so nobody picked up on it and made matter the influencer of consciousness. And it was, and it was very interesting how flippantly Kat just mentioned that when I was interviewing her some months past. She said, we stopped being divine when Darwin came around in the 1850s. Darwin, and she was suggesting that Darwin was an agent of their society. Clear, she didn't come right out and say it, but people like Kat don't really have a whole lot of original ideas, and the value in talking to them publicly in an interview is they're going to repeat a lot of the stuff they know from being raised in the culture they were raised in. So that's why it's important to talk to those people. So when she speaks, she's speaking for the satanic subculture. So Darwin was a great victory for them. Okay? So everything that Harari is saying is complete nonsense. Okay? Homo sapiens conquer the globe, so on and so forth. Now, maybe, and I hope I can do this without getting shut down, but maybe I can just play you a clip. I don't know why they give me such a hard time. Every other YouTube channel I watch is playing somebody else's YouTube content. Maybe you got to keep a little square camera in the corner with you on screen so the YouTube algorithm knows you're giving a commentary and you're not just replaying somebody else's material. Yuval Noah Harari officially is, I would call this the second show in a sub-series I do on the Talamanca Review. That I think in the first show I titled it Stupid Smart People. Okay? Yuval Noah Harari is a perfect example of a stupid smart person. Okay? The very best of sense mind, but cannot go over that line. And if there's one thing you take away from the Talamanca Review optimistically, it's this. I cannot tell you definitively what kind of world is coming. I can give you my conjecture. I can give you my suspicions. I can give you my intuition. But I can't tell you definitively. But one thing that I can tell you is that the next revolution is spiritual. And Yuval Noah Harari is a counter-revolutionary. He does not want this revolution to happen. Because when the spiritual revolution happens, the gig is up. It's over. No more reptilian control, no more gray aliens. We conquer the demons. We are on the cusp of winning the greatest battle the human race has been fighting since it gained language and consciousness. And perhaps even before that, because I think demonic influence existed before that. And it's huge. And make no mistake about it, there is a large contingent of people who do not want that to happen. And the World Economic Forum and those kinds of pundits are not here to help us evolve spiritually. In fact, they don't want us to evolve spiritually. Because when we evolve spiritually, we figure out they fucking kill kids. And then we're going to kill them. And they know it. Okay? I'm not saying kill them. I would say forgive them if you can. I can. I'm going to forgive them. That's my choice. And if you call yourself a Christian, you have to forgive them. Okay? They know not what they do. In this case, they do know what they're doing. But still, that attitude is very important. They know not what they do. It's always better to forgive, because if you can't forgive, you start a karmic cycle that could go 3 to 20 incarnations. Why double down? It's like knowing when... Oh, the real spiritual life is a lot like knowing when to leave a casino. The physical existence these lives were given, with all their sense and pleasure and pain and joy and suffering, it's like an amusement park or a casino. And any professional gambler, anybody who makes their living gambling, will tell you the key to being a successful gambler is knowing when to stop. The key to maintaining peace and growth in your consciousness is knowing when to stop. And what stop means in this context is stop cycles. And the only way to stop a cycle is to forgive. And any culture or any person that can't forgive will live in perpetual conflict. Who do you think I just explained to you? And we should not be taking up their conflicts. They're theirs because they can't forgive. Okay? So, the next revolution is spiritual. And it will be without arms. And it will be without Bolsheviks. It will be without communists. It will be without freedom fighters. It will be without FARC in Colombia. It won't be that kind of revolution. You know what it'll be? It'll be a revolution of apathy, where people pull out of the systems and go and find a sustainable way to live, appropriating whatever technology suits their needs, because there's no need to become Mennonites or Amish. Have a cell phone, have a computer, work online if you have to. Keep one pinky toe in the system. But physically, get out of the system. Control a portion of your food supply, control your water, and live without bills. And you're out of the system. And you have peace. Okay? Because the system taxes you in ways you don't even realize right now. And all that tax goes to supporting pseudo-intellectuals that are foisted on us by think tanks like the WEF, pseudo-intellectuals like Yuval Noah Harari. By the way, he writes at about a grade 8 level. I have no problem believing he sold a few million copies of his book. Plural. But I do not believe he has sold 45 million copies of his books. I don't believe that. That means in between Europe and North America, which would be 80-90% of his readership, which would be about 1 billion people between Europe, Western Europe, and North America, that means that 1 in 20 people have read a Yuval Noah Harari book. I have yet to bump into one of them. Okay? So it's a lie. And they do this shit all the time. Okay? You know, they give like an $8 million advance to Barack Hussein Obama for his memoirs after his 8 years in the White House. I promise you that book would not sell more than 3,000 or 4,000 copies. Okay? So the $8 million advance is just money laundering. Okay? Or what they do is they have a bunch of people order it online through a black fund they have, which is dirty money, and they launder the money and buy 5, 6, 7 million copies of Obama's books, throw them into an incinerator, but from the perspective of the IRS, 7.2 million copies of the book were sold. It's money laundering. Okay? And I'm not saying that that's what's going on with Yuval Noah Harari's books, but they're inflating his numbers to make him seem more important than he is. And he's gay too, which, oh, great surprise, an Israeli homosexual. Okay? You know, but just a super weird guy. And again, a classic example of a stupid smart person. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review. You folks have yourself